Good morning. Welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman, and I also want to welcome you to 2023. Hopefully you and your families have a blessed and happy new year. And today I want to present to you week number 17 of my Scrappy Block series. And before I get started on that, I want to just share with you, if you don't already have your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to go to use in beautiful scrappy quilts, such as the blocks that I'm sharing with you, make sure that you watch the link below. There's a complete video that I have, a tutorial on how you can actually get your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use to make beautiful quilts. I will also provide links below that will take you out to my website where you can take a look at the books that I provide. This smaller book is my Speedy Solutions to Cut and Organize Your Scrap Stash. It takes you step by step through how to get your scrap stash ready to use in beautiful quilts. There are 5 scrappy patterns in it, and then this is my patterns book. It corresponds to that. So all of the patterns in here are made using those scrappy Speedy Solutions techniques. And you can also just use regular fabrics that you have just by pulling yardage. And the patterns tell you everything you need to know to be able to do that. There are 12 patterns in this book, and if you click on that book in my website link, it'll show you all of the different patterns that are available, and there's just some beautiful patterns in there. It's amazing what you can do with your scrap stash. You can truly create beautiful quilts with them. And then I do always offer a special if you get the 2 books as a set. So take a look at the links below, and it will take you out to my site, and you can look that over. I do have a PDF attached to this particular video, which will give you the instructions on the block that I'm going to be teaching today. And this block is called the New Year's 9 patch. And it's just a simple block made using 1.5-inch squares and some 7-inch squares, which we create triangles with. And I have some big plans with all of these 1.5-inch squares. I am going to show you in my stash here. I've got a tub of 1.5-inch squares. It's filled. And it's overflowing actually, so I need to be using up these 1.5-inch squares, which is why I chose this block for today's scrappy block for week number 17. I need to get into my 1.5-inch square bin and get some of these used up and make a beautiful quilt. On the second page of this PDF, you'll see a quilt idea for you. They're beautiful scrappy 9-patch blocks set on point. So take a peek at that. Make sure you save the PDF or download it, or maybe save a playlist of all of these 52-week series of blocks so that you'll have those at your fingertips. Okay, so let's take a look at the block that I've created, and this is the PDF. Again, the PDF is linked in the description box below. There are 2 pages to it. Make sure you download it or save all of this to a playlist so that you have it at your fingertips. Very simple block to create. Nothing hard about this at all. It's just simply 1.5-inch squares, and you'll notice that I used lights, mediums, and darks in the construction of these. And I basically made a total of 8 9 patches. So there are 4 9 patches in here and 4 in the corners. I just made them assembly line fashion on my sewing machine, and I'll show you that here in a minute. And then I used 2 7-inch squares, which I've pulled here. And in order to get those rectangles, which need to measure 3.5 by 6.5 to put into the block here, I simply cut these 7-inch rectangles in half, and then I trimmed off 1/2 inch. And that gave me 4 6.5 by 3.5-inch rectangles. And so that's what you need for these rectangles. And then you're going to need a total of 72 of your 1.5-inch squares. And as you can see, I have a lot of 1.5-inch squares that I can use. And I simply just randomly went in and started choosing them. I didn't do any rhyme or reason to it, just kept pulling them. I did try to make sure that I wasn't putting the same scrap next to a neighbor. I wanted that to be very, very scrappy. And so that's all that I did. I've pulled lights, mediums, and darks. I made a mess of this bin. Now you can, if you choose, if you have a lot of 1.5-inch strips, you can certainly sew your strips together and cut them apart so that you have some 1.5-inch 2 patches, and then start creating 9 patches, etc. So that's totally up to you. But today I'm going to show you how to make them all from the 1.5-inch bin, and then we're going to attach these rectangles that you'll create from 7-inch squares. And I used light squares. You can absolutely use what you want. Maybe you want to use a dark color, a black, or a beautiful navy blue, or a bright red, whatever. This is your block. Have fun with it. By the way, back to these strips here. These were 1.5-inch strips. They were from a previous project, and I will often throw things like that into the bin of that same measurement. And since these were 1.5-inch strips, I threw them into this 1.5-inch bin because I figured at some point I can use them. You could simply sew a 3rd strip onto here so that you've got a 3-patch already, and that makes your 9-patch creation a whole lot easier. So simply do that. You can actually use width of fabric, the whole 44 inches, to create your strips, to create your 9 patches. Very simple way to do it, fast way to do it. But again, today I'm going to show you how to do this using your 1.5-inch squares from your Speedy Solutions Scrap Stash. So before I take my Scrappy 1.5-inch bin over to my sewing machine, I have stacked these 2 7-inch squares together, right? Actually, it's just one on top of one another. It doesn't matter if they're right sides together, wrong sides together. I am simply cutting them in half at 3.5 inches so that each of them will be 3.5 inches wide. And then I am simply going to remove a 1/2 inch from the length. And that will give me the size rectangle that I need. So this is waste, or you can put this in your Scrappy container, and we'll be using that to create some fun landscape quilts later if you want to hold on to that. But now I have 4 rectangles here, and each of these rectangles measures 3.5 inches wide by 6.5 inches long. So I'm going to take this and my 1.5-inch bin over to the sewing machine and get started on the block. So I've brought my 1.5-inch container over here. If you hear a humming noise, I do have the heater going behind me. It is a little chilly in the basement here, so I do need my heater going. So I apologize if you're hearing a humming noise. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on my 9 patches. We're going to create a total of 8 9 patches, and I'm simply going to do it in assembly line fashion. I'm just grabbing some 1.5-inch squares, and I'm going to start working on it. I'm going to put a leader in there. And the neat thing about this particular pattern, in basically any quilt pattern that you make, you can use the leader and ender method as you're working on other projects and create these 9 patches, because it can become the leader or the ender of anything that you're working on. So absolutely do that if you choose to. So what I've got here are 3 that I've gotten started, and right now I'm just trying to grab squares that are of a different value that are next to one another, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm not grabbing the same squares. And you can see I do make quite a mess of my container, but that's okay. I can always clean it up. So what I'm trying to accomplish here is to get one more. Let me go down here, see what else I can pull out. All right, so I believe I have a set of 6 or even more than that right here. Now what I'm going to do, as you'll see, I have 3 of them here. And now what I can do is simply start adding the 3rd element to this 9-patch row. So now I have 3 1.5-inch squares together, and I'm going to add another one here. So as you see, I am doing it's a chain of rows of these 9 patches. Let's see, I'll do a green one here. And one of the things that I have found that I prefer to do when you're working with these 9 patches is to press all of the seam allowances open it does end up giving you a much flatter block. You can simply press them to the sides. It certainly goes much faster if you just nest the seam allowances so that they're nested one flip one way and one the other way. But I did find as I was making these, my sample block, that those that were pressed open like that, let me see if I can share this with you closer. Those that were, and right now it's just basically pressed open by my fingers here, but they ended up laying flatter as the whole thing was put together, because a lot of these seam allowances are going to come together, and there's just a lot of fabric in that tiny little square. So, or you could simply just press them and nest them. Press these this direction and the next one the opposite direction. Totally up to you. You decide what works best for you. You might want to make a sample block, a sample 9-patch block, and see what works best for you. So I just wanted to share with you or show you the difference between these two. So this is the block where every seam has been pressed open. And when you touch the top of this, it definitely is much flatter. This does take a lot longer to fussy, you know, you have to be really fussy about opening each and every one of those seams as you're working with it. But the result is a much flatter block, and I think that's going to be much easier for quilting on. Here is a little 9-patch that was done where I've pressed all of the seams in one direction. So they went this way, this way, this way, and now I'm going to press them this way. And that works nicely, goes together very quickly. This is a technique that you're all familiar with, but there is a little bit more of a height to that, and there's a lot of excess fabric along these areas here. So as you're quilting, that might interfere with some of your quilting, but it's totally up to you, whatever you choose to do. I just wanted to share with you the two different blocks and how it can be done. So I've gone through and simply sewn 9 patches together, just kept adding. First it was a row of 2, and then it was a row of 3, and they're all linked together by the chain stitch here. And now I simply went ahead and finger pressed all of those seams open so that my seam allowances will be flat. And it's a little bit of fussy pressing there with your fingertips to get them open, but I think the result will be a much flatter block. So I am going to go ahead and do that. And then I am going to go ahead and take all of these blocks that I have just created and web them together with the rows. So each of the rows will get put together, and I'll do that in assembly line fashion as well. So you'll see here I have a chain of these 9 patches with the first 2 rows sewn together, and now I'm going to, in the same chain, take that 3rd row and flip it on top and go ahead and sew that 3rd row all the way down the chain. So everything is done in an assembly line fashion, which makes it go much faster. As I am sewing these seam allowances that are open and not nested, I do like to pin them, because then the seam allowances will go together much more accurately. So I do have all of the seam allowances pinned. And I'm removing the pin before I take the sew over it. I don't want to break needles. All right, now I've got all of these. There's 6 of them here that I've done in assembly line fashion. And I can open them up and press these seam allowances open as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll cut them apart and then press all of the seam allowances open, and I'll bring these all back to the table here. One thing you'll want to do in order to press those seam allowances open is to clip the chain stitch. So that chain stitch was that line of stitching that you stitched as you were putting them all together, and that will prevent it from being able to press those seam allowances open. You're going to have to remove that stitch there that linked them together. So now I can actually press them open. All right, so I have pressed all of my 9 patch units open. The seam allowances are all pressed open except for that one which I nested. I demonstrated that to you as a nesting technique. I can't find it out. Here it is, right here. I actually pressed one of the seam allowances open. I should have pressed both of them open on the last pass here, and that would allow for a little bit less bulk on this side. But you can feel the difference on this side, especially where everything is nested to one direction or another. There's just a little bit more thickness in that unit, and that's fine. It'll work for quilting, but you can obtain a much flatter piece. You definitely want to use a smaller stitch. I think I forgot to mention that at the beginning. I'm using a 2.4. You might even want to go to a 2.0 to make sure that your stitch length is nice and short and that there won't be any openings there. But it's so much flatter. It just lays so much nicer. Now it's important that each and every one of these squares or units is squared up to 3.5 inches. So I've gotten my square up ruler here, and I'm going to square up each and every one of these to 3.5 inches, and then we're going to lay out the block and put it together. I'll be right back. So now you see I have the block laid out in 3 rows here, and the first thing we're going to have to do is put our 4 patch of these 4 9 patch units together. So I'll simply sew this together and sew this together and then square that up to 6.5 inches, and then I'll be ready to actually put the rows together. I'm going to go ahead and sew that, and I'll be right back. All right, now I have everything laid out here. This is my 4 patch unit of 4 9 patches. So that's going in the center here. I'm going to just go ahead and web these 3 rows together like I normally do and put my block together. So I'll do that in fast motion so you don't have to watch it so slowly, and I'll be back here in just a second. Okay, so my block is finished. I am going to go over and press it. I'm going to square it up to 12.5 inches, and I'll meet you over at the tabletop. All right, so here are a couple of the blocks that I've just finished for you. And you can see as you put them together that they create these lighter motifs, or maybe these are going to be dark motifs for you. Maybe these are going to be dark rectangles that you're putting into your block. Or a medium, whatever color you want. I just went ahead and used light value fabrics for those, and I can have fun quilting a pretty motif in each of these. And I love how it's going together. It really went together quickly. Very fast block to sew, especially when you're doing it in an assembly line fashion where you're just chain stitching everything. And if you were to keep your 1.5 inch bin at your sewing machine for over the course of a month or so, you could absolutely have all of this ready for a very large quilt by just chain stitching a couple of them together before and after everything that you're sewing, whether you're working on garments, whether you're working on quilts. It's a great way to accomplish that. It's called a leader and ender method. Bonnie Hunter teaches that. There are so many people that use that technique. It's a great technique to use instead of just using a scrap to get started as you're sewing the seam allowance. You're actually accomplishing something by using sewing two squares together. So here are my blocks that I've put together. I would love to put this quilt together, and if you're interested in doing a live sew along with me creating this quilt, I would love to know that. Please comment and let me know if would like to join me for a live sew in on YouTube where we can actually create this block and make blocks and the entire quilt itself. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, my name is Lori Dickman. This is Quilting with Lori. If you like what you're seeing with my channel, please be sure to subscribe and like, and definitely comment. Let me know what you're doing with all of the blocks. I am just having a ball presenting a new block for you every single Monday, which allows you to use up your scrap stash and create some beautiful quilts. And again, if you haven't watched the video with Speedy Solutions to cut, sort, and organize your scrap stash, make sure you check on that video link below. I've got that in the description box, as well as a link to where these books are located and a playlist as well. I would recommend that you have a playlist of all of these blocks so that you can easily access them. And don't forget to download your PDF. You'll want that. And let me know if you're interested in going ahead with a live YouTube video where we can create this beautiful quilt, the New Year's 9-patch quilt, on point. I think it's going to be so beautiful. So let me know, comment below, and until next time, have a great week and happy quilting.